We're called to clothe the naked and feed the hungry, to make and grow disciples. How in the world can we be followers of Jesus if we never leave the fold to follow him anywhere? You've been working in the season of Lent, in your Lenten journey through the Gospel of John. My absolute, we used to call that, we still call that, the hermeneutic. My link to the Gospels is the Gospel of John, the intimate Gospel. The other Gospels, they have the sayings of Jesus. They have the miracles of Jesus. In John, they're not called miracles, they're called signs. Signs that lead to someone's belief. Signs that have changed and manifested the life not only of individuals, but an entire community as they gather together. The Gospel of John has the unique phrase, I am sayings. There are 11 of those throughout the Gospel. We're going to look at one today as we start to read in just a moment from John the 10th chapter. The I am sayings are incredible, but they are always prompted by conversations. While Matthew, Mark, and Luke have the sayings of Jesus, it is John that has conversations with a woman at the well, with Mary and Martha after the death of their brother, with his mother Mary at a wedding where in some ways she might have been kind of scolding him when he says to her, "Woman, what has that to do with me?" He does what most mothers do. My mother used to do that. Turn and says, "Just go ahead and do what I told you." Now that's not in the Revised Standard Version, but she says, "Do what he tells you," when he turns to the others. So those conversations are incredible conversations that lead us to the I am sayings. And the Gospel of John chapter 10 verses 1 through 10 is one of those times when Jesus has been talking with his disciples, having conversations to teach, and then the Pharisees show up. And when they show up, they begin to challenge him. I almost have in my mind that they may have been almost heckling him from the sidelines. And then in chapter 10, he turns to his disciples and he says the words we'll read today. They're on page 103 in your Pew Bible, or they're printed in your bulletin. Please join me as we read together. "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all out on his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus says to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Now, how many of you heard that text this morning and automatically, from this beautiful rudder piece, began to settle back into your pews because you knew you were going to hear an I am saying that you didn't hear? Were you ready to hear I am the good shepherd? Well, that's not verse 1 through 10. That's verse 11. And we're going to get there eventually before this is over. But verses 1 through 10 are often ignored just simply because we want to get to the I am the good shepherd, and the shepherd lays down his life for his friends. We want to get to that part, or for the sheep. We want to get to that part, but we got to kind of look and walk our way through those first 10 verses. Jesus was responding to the heckling, if you will, of the Pharisees. And in doing so, he comes pretty strong. He says, "Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter by the sheepfold, but by the gate, climbs in another way." And then he calls them thieves and robbers who come to steal and kill and destroy. But we don't want to hear that so much. We want to hear about shepherds and sheep and settle back into our pews from the Old Testament and the New Testament and think about Psalm 23, about lying down in green pastures and being led by still waters and walking through dark valleys and making it on the other side. And I want us to get there, but we got to go through another gate first. Much too often, we skip the thieves and the robbers, and the first I am saying about the sheep that's in verse 7, I am the gate of the sheep. And so if we wandered back there to the Good Shepherd, do not despair. If you settled into the pew a little deeper, because y'all have wonderful pads in your pews. I sat in the back row last week with my grandson, and I almost went to, he almost went to sleep. I was just joking. Don't tell Mike I said that. But if we settle, in fact, I have to, I'm sorry. It's me. It's my grandfather, when they at St. James Methodist Church in Florence decided they were going to put pads in the pews, he was solidly against it. He said we should not have pads in the pews. He said we should not do that. We couldn't, because if you put pads in the pews, I can remember him saying it because I was a little kid, if you put pads in the pews, I can promise you I will sleep every Sunday. To which my grandmother replied, go ahead, he's been doing it for 25 years. So if you settled into the pew to get comfortable with the Good Shepherd, hold on. We're going to get back to green pastures and still waters and cups overflowing and righteousness and goodness that's going to be a part of our life. We're going to get there. But first, let's talk about sheep. How many of you have had a lot of dealings with sheep? Some of you may have been around some sheep. Let me talk a little bit about sheep this morning. Sheep are not always what's the kind way to say this? They are not always the brightest of animals in the world. Their cognitive resources are often overtaken by their stomach, because they will literally eat their way off the side of a hillside and get into a crack, into rocks. They'll literally eat themselves off of a cliff. That's the reason a shepherd's crook was so important. They were always having to rescue the sheep who just ate their way into trouble. They just ate their way into danger. That's what they did. That's what the sheep were about. Now, also, sheep were not excessively hygienic. Sheep had a certain odor to them because of the heat and because of the wool that they were growing on their bodies. There's a certain odor that goes with them. They have a certain aromatic aura that is somewhat offensive to the nose. So I wanted you to know that about sheep. Sheep are also very easy prey for predators. Because they're not paying attention, most of the time heads down eating, because they do not have a lot of resources to protect themselves, shepherds were always necessary to protect them. If it wasn't a shepherd, it might have been a sheepdog. That's the reason they were so important, not just for the herding, but also for the protection of the animals. So after a long day of grazing and being rescued by shepherds and just generally emitting an aura along the way, they go into a pen, or we call it a sheepfold. They go into a fold, and the fold in those days that Jesus would have been, when Jesus was talking about this, was generally made up either of a natural area where there was an area where they could be protected on three sides, and then on the fourth side there would be a gap or a place open for the sheep. Now here's the deal. You didn't put a gate on that, okay? If you put a gate on that, there was a problem, because often if they piled up rocks or it had a natural area, the predators could climb over. They would often get inside. A wolf could jump over a rock wall. Sometimes the thieves would crawl over. The robbers would come in. So instead of getting all of the animals when that would happen, the gate simply was not there. They could rush quietly and quickly out of that and save the predominant number of those sheep that might be in the fold. So how in the world do you keep them in there? Well, this is how. Jesus explained it. He says, I am the gate for the sheep. A shepherd the trusted shepherd among those shepherds of those flocks that were gathered in that fold. And often there were many flocks of sheep that were together. They were placed in there. When they were all together, the shepherd, the good shepherd, the trusted shepherd would lie across the gap and would stay there and sleep there to protect the animals. Jesus says, I am the gate for the sheep. Beginning to see what's going on here? And that way, when the predators came and the robbers and thieves came, the shepherd was there to protect them and get out of the way so the others could get away and protect the sheep that were there already in the fold. Now, something else about sheep that we know is that at the end of every evening and night, the shepherds would come to the gate where the good shepherd was, and they would call their sheep. I don't know how you call sheep. I went to an Arkansas football game one time. I know how they call at the Arkansas games, but I don't know that there's a suey sheep. I don't know what that's about, but whatever they call. And so when they would give their call, the sheep that belonged to that shepherd would know the voice of their shepherd, and they would follow out. And so you would have this shepherd going here, and his sheep would follow, and have this shepherd going this direction, and they would follow, because they would follow the shepherd's voice that they knew, not a stranger's voice. Wow. Great. Now, sheep have been important throughout the history and throughout the story of the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's always been true. They've been important because we know that sheep are often referred to because that is how many writers of the Old Testament and now in the New Testament referred to the people of God, the children of God. We were the sheep. That's what the 23rd Psalm that we heard a moment ago sung so beautifully. We're the sheep that the shepherd is looking over. That we are the ones who need protection. We are the ones who sometimes do things that are not spiritually, aromatically appropriate. We are the sheep who sometimes get confused and spend more time worrying about things right in front of us rather than watching for the predators that are around us. And so, like a great shepherd, Jesus says, I'm not only the gate for the sheep, but I am also the good shepherd who will rescue you out of the rocks and out of the fields that you have wandered into that have danger among them. The words of Jesus in John are as much about us as God's children and God's people as it was about sheep. And to be honest with you, Jesus realized that there are thieves and there are robbers and there are those who are seeking to destroy God's people, his sheep in this world, even today. There are sheep like us who have robbed us of our joy because of the fear and hatred that exist in the world. We have those who have robbed others of the joy because of their distrust in families, in church sometimes. They are sheep like us that realize that our hope, our trust, our energy for making disciples, our desire to be more like Jesus can be destroyed. It can be stolen by a world consumed with greed and fear and loneliness and hatred. Jesus promised to be the gate. And as the gatekeeper, as the shepherd, as the good shepherd who protected the sheep from the predators that seek to consume us with fear and greed, and the thieves of evil that would steal our joy, our faith, our love, our hope in this world, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. I'm going to walk with you through the valley of the shadow of death, as we often read in the King James Version, the translation, in many translations. In Hebrew, it literally says, through the deepest, darkest valleys of life. Now, here's an interesting thing about sheep. Sheep can't always live in the pen. They can't always be in the fold. Sheep have a purpose. They were a great impact on the economy of the nomadic lifestyle of the Old Testament and now the agricultural lifestyle of the New Testament. That shepherds didn't herd sheep because they loved smelly sheep. They didn't herd sheep because they loved sleeping on the hard ground out in the elements for all of their lives. Sheep created a sustainable lifestyle for them. It created an ability to feed their families. It became a profitable enterprise to sell the sheep at market. Sheep had a purpose. They produced wool for warmth to clothe their families or for sale. They produced food for their families. They didn't stay in the fold. They followed their shepherd into the world to fulfill their purpose for being. Sheep always held in the fold could become diseased. But those who left the fold to eat in green pastures and drink the quiet, still, perfect waters, those were the sheep who were most profitable, who had the greatest value, who fulfilled their purpose for being. The children of God, when we are often called sheep, are not any different. We have a purpose. Just because we have a good shepherd and the Lord is our shepherd does not mean that we are asked to stay in the green pasture or by the still waters. It doesn't mean that we're intended to stay in the fold, protected by Jesus, who is the gate for the sheep. After all, a gate implies both ingress and egress. You can go in and out. We are called out of the fold and into the world to follow our shepherd, whose voice we know. We're called to clothe the naked and feed the hungry, to make and grow disciples. How in the world can we be followers of Jesus if we never leave the fold to follow him anywhere? There's a wonderful old spiritual that I absolutely love. It refers not only to sheep, it also refers to Samuel in his call and ministry. In that particular old spiritual says, hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. So we're finally getting back to where we wanted to go when I first read today's gospel. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, and the shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The beautiful image we have in those verses that led up to verse 11 is the shepherd of Jesus standing at the gate and calling us, his sheep, out of the fold and into the world to fulfill the purpose for which we have been called. Jesus said that the sheep know their shepherd's voice and follow. Several years ago, when I first went to Trinity in Huntsville, my second day in the office, I had a gentleman who showed up in one of the motorized chairs, and he came into my office, and I heard a commotion outside the little ante area, and my assistant was saying something, and in the door came Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry was an interesting guy. Mr. Henry was he was one of those folks that when he came through the door, you knew he needed something. More importantly, he wanted something. Mr. Henry said, "Oh, you're the new preacher." I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I need to tell you," he said, I only have about 2 months to live, and my wife just died, and my car is in the shop, and my car was in the shop, but then I had to do a payday loan, and so now it's a title loan, and they've got it, and I can't get it out." And he said, "And I don't really have a place to sleep tonight." He gave me this long list of things. When he got through, I was trying to sort out exactly how I could help him. And it came down to we could help him a little bit. We got him going. So I'm an easy mark, okay? I just got to tell you. So I helped him a little bit personally, and then the church helped him a little bit. And then 2 weeks later, he came back and he said, "Preacher," he said, "thank y'all for helping me get my car out of the..." It was like $100. He said, "I thank you for helping me get my car out." And he said, "I really need some Kroger cards." I know because he knew we gave out Kroger cards for food. And so I said, "Okay." So they gave him some Kroger cards out of the office downstairs. And then I ran into him at Kroger's and there wasn't a whole lot of food in his basket. He was gonna be in the Spirit before the night was over. And so I helped Mr. Henry put that back. And we got some healthy food to go in there. It was about a month before he came back after that. For about 4.5 years, Mr. Henry, every 2 weeks, was in my office. The battery ran out on his chair. I discovered he could walk a lot better than he told me, it's a miracle. He only had 2 months to live, but it's now about 8 years. He's still doing fine. But one day I was sitting in the office, and someone new downstairs, the volunteers, said, "There's someone on the phone," and she said, "I put him into every office." And he said, and every time I do that, he hangs up the phone when they answer the phone. And so she finally put him into me, and I heard Mr. Henry say, "Hey, preacher." I said, "Have you been calling?" Yeah, they've been sending me all over the church, but I know your voice. I couldn't help but think about this passage. Here was a sheep, maybe a little bit of a black sheep, didn't go to church with us, wasn't a part of where we were. But if I was going to follow my shepherd, I had to find ways to help him clothe the naked, feed the hungry, bring warmth to those who need it. Well, you're thinking now, wait a minute, he was a charlatan and maybe didn't deserve it. And then I remembered John Wesley, dadgum him sometimes. He said, if you help the 10 people who are unworthy, you might help the one who is actually in need. So one of these days, I hope I'll see Mr. Henry in a place just as important in the fold as we all enjoy today. Hush. Hush. Somebody's calling our name. It's our shepherd to leave the comforts of the joy and the protection of the fold and go into the world, because in this community, maybe next door, maybe in our own families, there are those who are hungry and thirsty for the presence and the love of God. There are those in this community who need to be clothed in the love of God because there's no one there to even say that they love them. There are probably those in this community that are lonely and afraid and without hope. And if you listen carefully, our shepherd is calling our name to go into the world to fulfill our purpose as the children of God, sheep of the Good Shepherd. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.